Henry Russell's communicator chirps with an urgent message, jolting him from his pre-summit preparations. The screen flashes with a notification from Rhea, his Ferengi girlfriend. Her words make his heart race. "Henry, I need your private part. Now." The 28-year-old human diplomat stares at the message, his mind reeling. He's stationed on the Ferengi homeworld, and in less than 24 hours, he's set to participate in a critical diplomatic summit between Earth and Ferengi leaders. The trade agreement they're negotiating could reshape the future of both civilizations. Rhea's message comes again, more insistent. "It's mating season. I can't control it. I need you." Henry's hands shake as he considers the implications. Engaging in intimate relations with Rhea could jeopardize the delicate negotiations and his career. But refusing her request might strain their relationship and potentially worsen human-Ferengi relations on a personal level. As he contemplates his options, his communicator buzzes again. This time, it's a classified briefing from his superiors at the Earth Embassy. The information makes his blood run cold. Earth's resources are dwindling at an alarming rate. The success of this trade agreement isn't just important, it's vital for humanity's continued survival and expansion into space. Henry's personal dilemma has suddenly become a matter of species-wide importance. He glances at Rhea's messages again, noting the increasing desperation in her tone. Her biological urges are intensifying, and he knows from experience that Ferengi females can become aggressive during mating season. A commotion outside his quarters draws his attention. Through the window, he sees a group of Ferengi officials gathered, their large ears twitching as they engage in heated discussion. Among them, he recognizes Rhea's distinctive silhouette. She's gesticulating wildly, her behavior erratic and drawing unwanted attention. Henry's communicator chirps again. It's a message from the Earth ambassador. "Russell, we've received word that the Grand Nagus himself is taking an interest in your situation. Tread carefully. The fate of our species may depend on how you handle this." The young diplomat feels the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. He has mere hours to navigate this complex web of interspecies politics, personal relationships, and the biological imperatives of an alien race he doesn't fully understand. As he watches Rhea's increasingly frantic behavior through the window, Henry knows he must make a decision. The clock is ticking down to the summit, and with each passing moment, the stakes grow higher. Whatever choice he makes will alter the course of human-Ferengi relations forever. With a deep breath, Henry steps towards the door. It's time to face the music, and possibly save humanity in the process. Henry's hand hesitated on the door handle as he took a deep breath. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, threatening to crush his commitment. But he knew he couldn't face this alone. With a swift motion, he turned away from the door and strode purposefully down the corridor towards Ambassador Marcus Thornton's office. The seasoned diplomat looked up from his desk as Henry entered, concern etching lines across his weathered face. "Russell, what's the situation?" Henry quickly outlined the predicament, Rhea's urgent biological needs, the looming trade negotiations, and the potential consequences for Earth's future. Thornton listened intently, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A delicate situation indeed," Thornton mused, his eyes distant as he processed the information. After a moment, he focused on Henry. "We can't ignore the diplomatic implications, but we also can't disregard the personal element. Perhaps a compromise is in order." Relief washed over Henry as his mentor continued. "Arrange a brief, discreet meeting with Rhea in one of the private chambers here at the embassy. Address her immediate needs, but keep it short. We need you focused on the summit." Nodding gratefully, Henry left to make the arrangements. Within the hour, he found himself in a secluded room deep within the Earth Embassy, heart pounding as Rhea entered. The Ferengi woman's eyes were wild, her breathing rapid. "Henry!" she gasped, crossing the room in quick strides. "I can't. I need—" Their bodies collided in a frenzy of touch and movement. Henry's diplomatic training fell away as instinct took over, his hands exploring the unfamiliar ridges and textures of Rhea's alien physiology. Their encounter was intense, passionate, but all too brief. A shrill alarm cut through the air, startling them apart. Henry's communicator buzzed urgently against his hip. He fumbled to activate it, still breathless from the encounter. "Russell, Ambassador Thornton's voice crackled through the device. "Get to the main hall immediately. The Grand Nagus is here." Panic surged through Henry as he and Rhea scrambled to make themselves presentable. He could see the frustration and lingering need in her eyes, but there was no time to address it now. "I'm sorry," he whispered, planting a quick kiss on her forehead before dashing out of the room. Henry arrived in the main hall just as the Grand Nagus, Zek, was being ushered in. The Ferengi leader's eyes twinkled with a mix of curiosity and cunning as they settled on Henry. "Ah, the young human diplomat," Zek said, his voice a raspy chuckle. "I've heard interesting things about you." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. How much did Zek know? Before he could formulate a response, Ambassador Thornton stepped in smoothly. "Grand Nagus, what an unexpected pleasure. To what do we owe this honor?" Zek's grin widened, revealing pointed teeth. "Oh, just thought I'd drop by, see how the preparations for our little trade talk are coming along, and perhaps," his gaze flicked back to Henry, "discuss some interesting developments I've caught wind of." As the diplomatic dance began, Henry noticed a commotion outside the embassy windows. A group of Ferengi males were gathered, their behavior agitated and aggressive. Among them, he recognized Senator Brunt, a known conservative voice in Ferengi politics. Brunt's voice carried through the open window. "We cannot allow these humans to corrupt our values. This trade agreement will be the downfall of Ferengi society." The crowd's agitation grew, and Henry realized with a sinking feeling that Rhea's intensified pheromones must be affecting the Ferengi males nearby. The situation was spiraling out of control. Just then, a new figure entered the hall. An elegant Vulcan woman strode purposefully towards the group, her presence immediately commanding attention. Ambassador Thornton turned to Henry. "Ah, good. Dr. Alara Talek, our Vulcan xenobiology expert. I took the liberty of calling her in." Dr. Talek's eyes swept the room, taking in the tense atmosphere. "I believe I have arrived at a critical juncture," she stated, her tone calm and measured. "Perhaps we should adjourn to a more private setting to discuss the biological aspects of our current predicament." As they moved to a conference room, Henry's mind raced. Between Zek's knowing looks, Brunt's protests outside, and Rhea's uncommitment condition, the trade negotiations hung by a thread. And now, with Dr. Telek's arrival, a new variable had been introduced. Henry knew that the next few hours would determine not just his own fate, but potentially that of human-Ferengi relations and Earth's future. As the door to the conference room closed behind them, he steeled himself for what was sure to be the most challenging diplomatic scenario of his career. As the door to the conference room closed behind them, Henry found himself face-to-face with Dr. Alara Talek, the Vulcan xenobiologist. Her piercing gaze seemed to analyze every micro-expression on his face. "Mr. Russell," she began, her voice calm and measured, "I understand we have a rather urgent situation involving a Ferengi female's accelerated mating cycle. Please, bring me to the patient immediately." Henry nodded, leading Dr. Telek back to the private chamber where he had left Rhea. As they entered, Henry's heart sank. Rhea was curled up in a corner, her body trembling visibly. Dr. Telek approached Rhea, tricorder in hand. The device emitted a series of soft beeps as she scanned the Ferengi woman. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The hormone levels are off the charts. It appears prolonged exposure to human pheromones has triggered an unprecedented acceleration of her mating cycle." Henry's communicator chirped insistently. He stepped aside to answer it, finding Ambassador Thornton's grave face on the screen. "Russell, we've just received word from Earth. The resource crisis, it's worse than we thought. This trade agreement isn't just important anymore. It's our only hope for survival." The weight of this revelation hit Henry like a physical blow. He glanced back at Rhea, torn between his duty to Earth and his personal feelings. Dr. Talek's voice cut through his thoughts. "Mr. Russell, I must inform you that without further physical contact from you, Ms. Rhea's condition will continue to deteriorate. The physiological consequences could be severe." Before Henry could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Through the window, he saw a group of young Ferengi gathering, led by a familiar face, Nog, a recent Starfleet Academy graduate. Nog's voice carried clearly through the open window. "Friends, fellow Ferengi, We stand at a crossroads. For too long, we've clung to outdated traditions. It's time we embrace diversity and new ideas. Think of the economic opportunities that await us if we open our minds. The crowd's reaction was mixed, with some cheering while others grumbled disapprovingly. Henry could see the generational divide forming before his eyes. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Grand Nagus Zek strode in, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Ah, what a delightful mess we find ourselves in," he cackled. "But fear not, I have the perfect solution." Henry braced himself as Zek continued. "We'll formalize your relationship with Rhea through a traditional Ferengi mating ritual. A public ceremony, exchange of wealth. The works. It'll satisfy the conservatives and show everyone we're serious about interspecies cooperation." Henry's mind reeled at the proposal. Before he could formulate a response, Ambassador Thornton entered the room, followed by a stern-looking man in a Starfleet admiral's uniform. "Henry, this is Admiral James Holden," Thornton introduced. "He's here to oversee the final stages of our negotiations." Admiral Holden fixed Henry with an intense look. "Mr. Russell, I hope you understand the gravity of our situation. Earth's future hangs in the balance. Whatever you decide here will have far-reaching consequences." As if on cue, Senator Brunt's voice boomed from outside. "Grand Nagus Zek has lost his mind. He's selling out our people to these humans. I call for a vote of no confidence." The political upheaval threatened to derail everything. Henry's mind raced, trying to find a solution that could satisfy all parties. He opened his mouth to speak when suddenly, every communicator in the room blared to life with an emergency alert. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a star chart of nearby space. Admiral Holden's face paled as he studied it. "An unidentified alien fleet is approaching Ferengi space at high warp. We have no idea who they are or what they want." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Henry looked from Rhea's suffering form to the chaotic scene outside, then to the ominous display of the approaching fleet. He realized that his next actions could determine not just the fate of Earth-Ferengi relations, but potentially the safety of both civilizations. Taking a deep breath, Henry stepped forward. "I think I have an idea," he began, his mind already formulating a plan that could potentially address all the challenges they faced. "But it's going to require cooperation from everyone in this room, and a fair bit of luck." As all eyes turned to him, Henry steeled himself for what would undoubtedly be the most critical diplomatic maneuver of his career, and possibly the most important moment in recent interstellar history. As Henry finished outlining his plan, a tense silence fell over the room. The weight of the situation pressed down on everyone present, but there was no time for hesitation. Admiral Holden's communicator chirped urgently, breaking the silence. He glanced at the device, his expression darkening. "The unidentified fleet has been analyzed. It's the Orion Syndicate." A collective intake of breath filled the room. The Orion Syndicate's reputation preceded them. Opportunistic, technologically advanced, and utterly ruthless. Henry's mind raced, quickly adapting his plan to this new development. "This could work in our favor," he said, drawing confused looks from those around him. "The Orion threat could unite the feuding Ferengi factions." Admiral Holden nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "Russell, I'm putting you in charge of formulating our diplomatic response. Your unique position and intimate knowledge of Ferengi biology could be crucial." Henry felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He turned to Dr. Talek, who was still monitoring Rhea. "Doctor, we need a solution for Rhea's condition that won't interfere with the diplomatic proceedings." The Vulcan raised an eyebrow, considering for a moment. "I propose a controlled environment where you and Rhea can engage in the necessary physical intimacy to stabilize her condition. We can monitor and contain the effects of her pheromones." Grand Nagus Zek's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "A mating ritual," he exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. "We'll modify the traditional Ferengi ceremony, add some human elements. It's perfect." Senator Brunt, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Grand Nagus, you can't be serious. This is an outrage." "Oh, but I am serious," Zek replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This compromise will satisfy both the conservatives and the progressives, and it will show those Orion interlopers that we stand united. As if on cue, Nog's voice carried through the window once more. Friends, we have a unique opportunity before us. Let us embrace this chance for unity and progress. Henry watched as the crowd outside began to shift, the younger Ferengi's words seeming to sway even some of the more conservative members. Ambassador Thornton pulled Henry aside. This is a delicate situation, Russell. Are you prepared for the long-term implications of this action? Henry nodded, his purpose firm. I understand the risk, Ambassador, but I believe this is our best chance for success, both diplomatically and personally. As preparations for the hybrid ritual began, Henry found himself thrust into a crash course on Ferengi mating customs. He learned of the public declarations, the exchange of assets, and the ceremonial joining of hands. All the while, his mind was split between the impending ceremony and the approaching Orion fleet. Admiral Holden worked tirelessly with Ferengi military leaders, combining Earth sensor technology with Ferengi cloaking devices to create a hidden defensive perimeter around the planet. The atmosphere was tense, filled with a mix of anticipation and fear. Within the Earth Embassy, Dr. Telek and her Ferengi counterparts had constructed a specialized chamber to contain Rhea's intensifying pheromones. Henry visited her regularly, each time finding it harder to leave her side. As news of the Orion fleet spread, panic began to ripple through the Ferengi population. Nog and his followers launched a media campaign, using holographic displays to showcase the strength of human Ferengi cooperation. Images of Henry and Rhea, carefully staged, became a symbol of unity in the face of external threats. The day of the ritual arrived all too quickly. Henry stood before a mirror adjusting the hybrid outfit that had been designed for the occasion, a blend of a Starfleet dress uniform and traditional Ferengi formal wear. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of nerves and excitement coursing through him. A commotion outside caught his attention. Through the window, he could see Senator Brunt leading a group of protesters, their voices rising in anger. Simultaneously, his communicator buzzed with an urgent message from Admiral Holden. The Orion fleet had accelerated, their intentions still unknown. Taking a deep breath, Henry stepped out of his quarters and made his way to the ceremonial grounds. A sea of faces, human, Ferengi, and a smattering of other species, turned to watch his approach. At the far end of the aisle stood Rhea, her beauty accentuated by her ceremonial attire. As Henry began his walk towards his future, he knew that every step carried the weight of two worlds. The success of the trade negotiations, the stability of Ferengi society, and the safety of both Earth and Ferenginar rested on his shoulders. The crowd fell silent as Henry reached Rhea. Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. Grand Nagus Zek stepped forward, ready to begin the ceremony, when suddenly a shout rang out from the back of the gathering. "Stop this madness," Senator Brunt's voice carried over the crowd. "We cannot allow our sacred traditions to be corrupted." Henry tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for Rhea's. As murmurs of discontent began to spread through the crowd, a thunderous roar erupted from above. The assembled guests looked up to see a massive view screen flickering to life, displaying a menacing fleet of Orion ships entering Ferengi orbit. Grand Nagus Zek's voice cut through the chaos. "My fellow Ferengi, honored Earth delegates, we face a threat that endangers us all. Now is the time to put aside our differences and stand united." The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to Henry and Rhea. In that moment, Henry knew what he had to do. He squeezed Rhea's hand and stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Today, we're not just joining two individuals, but two worlds. Let our union be the first step towards a future where humans and Ferengi stand together against any threat." A cheer went up from the crowd, drowning out Senator Brunt's protests. Even the most conservative Ferengi seemed swayed by the imminent danger and the promise of a powerful alliance. The ceremony resumed with renewed urgency. Henry and Rhea exchanged tokens of material wealth, Henry presenting a data rod containing valuable Earth technologies, while Rhea offered a string of precious latinum. As they completed each ritual step, the tension in the hall visibly eased, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Dr. Telek approached with a specialized containment suit for Rhea, designed to control her pheromone emissions during the ceremony. As Rhea donned the suit, Henry could see the strain in her eyes, the effort it took to maintain composure through her accelerated mating cycle. Just as they were about to complete the final step of the ritual, alarms blared throughout the complex. Admiral Holden rushed to Henry's side, his face grim. "The Orions have breached our outer defenses," he reported, his voice low and urgent. "They're demanding immediate access to Ferengi markets and resources. If we don't comply, they're threatening orbital bombardment." Henry's mind raced, weighing options and potential outcomes. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He turned to Dr. Tilek, who was monitoring Rhea's condition nearby. "Doctor, the chamber you designed for Rhea's treatment, could it be modified to project pheromones on a larger scale?" Dr. Tilek's eyebrow raised slightly, a gesture Henry had come to recognize as the Vulcan equivalent of surprise. "Theoretically, yes, but the implications of such a weapon could be the key to repelling the Orion threat," Henry finished. He turned to address the gathered officials. "We have the means to defend ourselves right here. If we can amplify and project Ferengi pheromones into space, we might be able to disorient the Orion crews and disrupt their attack." Grand Nagus Zek's eyes lit up with excitement. "Brilliant! A weapon that costs us nothing but could save us billions in property damage. I love it." Admiral Holden nodded grimly. "It's our best shot, but we'll need to act fast." As Dr. Tilek and a team of Ferengi scientists began modifying the chamber, Henry turned back to Rhea. Despite the chaos around them, he was struck by her beauty and strength. "Rhea, I know this isn't how either of us imagined this day would go, but I need you to know." She placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "I know, Henry. Let's save our worlds first. Then we'll have all the time we need for words." With a nod, they completed the final steps of the ritual. As they sealed their union with a kiss, Henry felt a surge of emotion that transcended species and culture. They were truly becoming one, in more ways than he could have ever imagined. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The modified chamber was quickly integrated with Earth sensor arrays and Ferengi cloaking technology. As the Orion fleet began its approach for the first wave of attacks, Henry and Rhea entered the chamber together. "Your combined presence should generate the specific pheromone signature needed to affect the Orions," Dr. Tilek explained as she sealed the door behind them. Inside the chamber, Henry took Rhea's hands in his. The air was thick with an intoxicating scent that made his head spin. He could feel the energy building around them, the very air seeming to vibrate with potential. "Ready?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rhea nodded, her eyes locked on his. Together. As the chamber activated, a massive surge of energy coursed through the facility. Henry felt as if every cell in his body was being charged, connected not just to Rhea, but to something much larger. Through the chamber's viewing port, he saw a concentrated beam of energy projecting into space. The effect on the Orion fleet was immediate and dramatic. On the interfaces throughout the complex, they watched as the Orion ships began to move erratically. Several collided, their crews clearly struggling to maintain control. Admiral Holden's voice came through the comms, tight with controlled excitement. "It's working! The human Ferengi Defense Force is moving in now." As the battle unfolded in space, Henry and Rhea remained in the chamber, their continued presence necessary to maintain the pheromone projection. The experience was intense, almost overwhelming. Henry felt as if he could sense Rhea's every thought and emotion, their connection deepening with each passing moment. Time seemed to lose all meaning. Henry wasn't sure if they had been in the chamber for minutes or hours when Dr. Tilek's voice finally came through the speaker. "The Orion threat has been neutralized. You may exit the chamber now." As the door opened, Henry and Rhea emerged to find a very different world than the one they had left. The air was thick with excitement and possibility. Grand Nagus Zek was already deep in discussion with Ambassador Thornton, gesticulating wildly as he outlined plans for an expanded trade agreement. Admiral Holden approached them, a rare smile on his face. "Well done, you two. Your actions today have opened up possibilities we never could have imagined." Henry nodded, still feeling slightly dazed from the intensity of the chamber experience. He looked at Rhea, sensing a new depth to their connection that both thrilled and slightly unnerved him. As they made their way through the crowd of celebrating humans and Ferengi, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The implications of their deepened empathic bond, the long-term effects of the pheromone weapon on both species, the new era of human-Ferengi relations. All of these opened up new frontiers of discovery and potential conflict. But for now, as he held Rhea's hand and basked in the glow of their shared victory, Henry allowed himself a moment of pure joy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as individuals, as a couple, and as representatives of a new era of interstellar cooperation. Cooperation still pulsing through the air, Henry and Rhea found themselves thrust into a whirlwind of activity. The successful defense against the Orion Syndicate had opened doors neither of them could have anticipated. Dr. Telek approached them, her Vulcan composure barely concealing her excitement. "Your experience in the chamber has produced some fascinating results," she said, gesturing for them to follow her to a makeshift lab. The pheromone weapon's effectiveness was beyond our initial projections. As they entered the lab, Henry felt a strange tingling sensation at the base of his skull. He glanced at Rhea, who seemed to be experiencing something similar. Their eyes met, and for a moment Henry could have sworn he felt a flicker of her thoughts brushing against his consciousness. "We need to run some tests," Dr. Telek continued, seemingly oblivious to their silent exchange. "The implications of this breakthrough could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies biology." Before they could respond, Admiral Holden burst into the lab, his face flushed with excitement. "Russell, we've got a situation. Grand Nagus Zek is proposing an expansion of the trade agreement. He wants to establish joint human-Ferengi colonies along the border of our territories." Henry blinked, trying to process this new information. As he did, a sudden flash of unfamiliar memories washed over him. Scenes of Ferengi marketplaces, the feel of latinum between his fingers, the taste of tube grubs. He shook his head, disoriented. "Henry?" Rhea's voice was infused with concern. "Are you all right?" He nodded, trying to focus. "Yeah, just feeling a bit strange. Admiral, what are the details of this proposal?" As Holden began to outline Zek's plan, Henry noticed Rhea's expression shifting, her brow furrowing in concentration. She seemed to be grasping the complex political and economic implications with an ease that surprised even her. "This could be an incredible opportunity," she said, her voice filled with a new confidence. "But we'll need to navigate carefully. The cultural implications alone could be staggering." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Thornton, accompanied by a stern-faced woman Henry didn't recognize. "Henry, Rhea, I'd like you to meet Senator Victoria Hawthorne," Thornton said, his voice tight. "She has some concerns about the recent developments." Senator Hawthorne fixed them with an unwavering focus. "Mr. Russell, Ms. Rhea, while your actions may have averted an immediate crisis, they've opened a Pandora's box of potential issues. The idea of joint colonies is preposterous. We cannot risk such extensive cultural contamination." As the senator spoke, Henry felt a surge of irritation that didn't seem entirely his own. He glanced at Rhea, seeing his own emotions mirrored in her eyes. Their newly forged bond was growing stronger, blurring the lines between their individual experiences. Before they could respond to Hawthorne's concerns, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Dr. Telek's communicator chirped urgently. "Doctor, we have a situation on Ferenginar." A panicked voice came through. "A group of rogue scientists led by Dr. Rega have accidentally released a potent pheromone cloud in a populated area. The effects are chaotic." The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Admiral Holden began coordinating with Starfleet, while Ambassador Thornton attempted to calm Senator Hawthorne, who was growing increasingly agitated. Henry turned to Rhea, their eyes locking in silent understanding. Without a word, they moved in unison towards Dr. Telek. "Doctor," Henry said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them, "we need to get to Ferenginar. Now." Dr. Telek nodded, quickly gathering her equipment. "Your unique physiology might be the key to developing an antidote, but we'll need to work fast." As they prepared to beam down to the planet's surface, Henry felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The situation was spiraling in ways he couldn't have imagined, and he knew that the decisions they made in the coming hours would have far-reaching consequences. Just before they stepped onto the transporter pad, a new alert sounded. Admiral Holden's face paled as he read the incoming transmission. "We've got another problem," he said grimly. The Klingons have noticed our activities. They're increasing their military presence along the Ferengi border. Henry felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. As the transporter beam began to engulf them, he reached out and took Rhea's hand, drawing strength from their connection. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as individuals, as a couple, and as the living embodiment of a new era of interstellar cooperation. The familiar tingle of the transporter enveloped them, and in a shimmer of light, they vanished from the Earth Embassy, headed towards an uncertain future on Ferenginar. The transporter beam dissipated, leaving Henry, Rhea, and Dr. Tilek standing in the midst of chaos. The air was thick with an overpowering scent that made Henry's head swim. Around them, Ferengi citizens stumbled about in a daze, their behavior erratic and unpredictable. "This way," Dr. Tilek said, leading them towards a nearby research facility. "We need to set up a lab immediately." As they hurried through the streets, Henry felt a surge of disorientation that wasn't entirely his own. He glanced at Rhea, seeing his own confusion mirrored in her eyes. Their empathic bond, strengthened by their experience in the pheromone chamber, was growing more intense by the minute. Inside the facility, they found a scene of frenzied activity. Ferengi scientists scrambled to contain the crisis, their usual greed-driven demeanor replaced by genuine concern for their fellow citizens. Dr. Tilek wasted no time in commandeering a lab space. "We need to analyze the pheromone compound and develop an antidote," she said, her fingers flying over a console. "But first, I need to run some tests on both of you." As Tilek began her examination, Henry felt a strange tingling sensation at the base of his skull. He caught Rhea's eye, and suddenly, he could sense her discomfort as clearly as his own. "Fascinating," Dr. Tilek murmured, studying her readings. "The bond between you has accelerated beyond my initial projections. This could be the key to synthesizing an effective antidote." Before Henry could respond, the lab door burst open. Dr. Beverly Crusher strode in, her red hair a stark contrast to the sea of Ferengi faces. "I came as soon as I heard," she said, her eyes locking with Henry's. "The situation is worse than we thought." Henry felt a jolt of surprise and something else. A complex mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. "Beverly," he said, his voice tight, "I didn't expect to see you here." Dr. Crusher's gaze softened slightly. "We can catch up later, Henry. Right now, we have a crisis to solve." As the two doctors conferred, Henry turned to Rhea. He didn't need words to convey his unease. He could feel her reassurance flowing through their bond. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Admiral Holden's voice crackled over the comm system. "We've got incoming Klingon ships. All personnel, prepare for potential hostile action." The lab erupted into a flurry of activity. Dr. Tilek's voice cut through the chaos. "We need a unique combination of human and Ferengi DNA to create the antidote, specifically from two individuals with a strong empathic bond." All eyes turned to Henry and Rhea. "The procedure will be risky," Dr. Crusher warned. "We don't fully understand the implications of your bond." Henry met Rhea's gaze, feeling her willpower matching his own. "We'll do it," he said firmly. The next hours were a blur of pain and intense sensation. As the doctors extracted and combined their genetic material, Henry felt as if his very essence was being pulled apart and reassembled. Through it all, Rhea's presence was a constant, their shared experience creating a connection deeper than he could have imagined possible. As the final extraction was completed, Henry's senses suddenly sharpened. The lab's beeping monitors became almost deafening, while Rhea's breathing beside him took on a strange, echoing quality. "Henry?" Rhea's voice was filled with concern. "Your ears." He reached up, feeling the slight elongation of his earlobes. Nearby, Rhea effortlessly lifted a heavy piece of equipment, her eyes widening in surprise at her newfound strength. Dr. Tilek's voice cut through Henry's disorientation. "The antidote is ready, but we need to test it immediately." Before they could respond, the lab doors shuddered under a heavy impact. Outside, they could hear the frenzied cries of affected Ferengi citizens. "They've breached the outer defenses," Admiral Holden's voice came through the comm. "We can't hold them back much longer." Henry locked eyes with Rhea, their decision made in an instant of shared thought. We'll test it on ourselves, he said, already rolling up his sleeve. As Dr. Crusher prepared the injections, the lab doors burst open. A wave of frenzied Ferengi poured in, their eyes wild with uncontrolled urges. Among them, Henry spotted Senator Victoria Hawthorne, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "Hurry!" Dr. Telek shouted, struggling to hold back the mob. With a shared nod, Henry and Rhea extended their arms. The sting of the needle was nothing compared to the rush of the antidote entering their bloodstreams. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Then clarity, the overwhelming pheromone haze that had clouded Henry's mind, began to dissipate. Beside him, he felt Rhea's relief mirroring his own. But there was no time to celebrate. The mob was still advancing, and beyond the facility's walls, Klingon ships loomed in Ferenginar's skies. As Henry and Rhea stood together, their bodies still reeling from the ordeal, they knew that their trial was far from finished. The true test of their bond and the future of human-Ferengi relations was just beginning. The true test of their bond and the future of human-Ferengi relations was just starting to unfold. As the antidote coursed through their veins, Henry and Rhea stood motionless, their bodies rigid with tension. The research facility fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment. Dr. Tilek and Dr. Crusher hovered nearby, their eyes fixed on the monitors displaying vital signs. Suddenly, Henry's body convulsed violently. He dropped to his knees, gasping for air as his skin took on a sickly greenish hue. Rhea reached out to steady him, but as her hand made contact with his arm, her own body jerked back. Her eyes widened in shock as her skin began to emit an intense, pulsating bioluminescence. "Fascinating," Dr. Tilek murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her concern. She quickly snapped back to action, barking orders to her team. "We need to stabilize them immediately." Dr. Crusher was already moving, her hands flying over a medical tricorder. "Their neural patterns are going haywire," she reported, her voice tense. "We need to administer a series of cortical stabilizers before—" Her words were cut off as Henry let out a guttural scream. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor. Rhea fell beside him, her body trembling as waves of light rippled across her skin. As the medical team worked feverishly to stabilize the pair, something extraordinary began to happen. The empathic bond between Henry and Rhea, already strengthened by their shared experience in the pheromone chamber, intensified exponentially. Their minds merged in a way never before seen in any known species, creating a unique form of shared consciousness. Dr. Tilek's eyes widened as she studied the readings on her tricorder. "This is unprecedented," she breathed. "Their neural patterns are synchronizing at a quantum level." In their shared mental space, Henry and Rhea found themselves floating in a sea of information. Fragments of memories, both human and Ferengi, swirled around them. They could sense the scientists working on their bodies, could feel the urgency of the situation. Without speaking, they began to guide the medical team through a series of modifications to the antidote. Their hybrid physiology knowledge, combined in real time, allowed them to intuitively understand what needed to be done. Outside the facility, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The pheromone-crazed mob had grown larger and more aggressive, their frenzied cries echoing through the streets of Ferenginar. Admiral Holden's voice crackled over the comm system, his tone grim. "We can't hold them back much longer," he reported, "and we've got another problem. Klingon warships are decloaking in orbit." Dr. Crusher looked up from her work, her face pale. "We need more time," she said urgently. As if in response to her plea, Henry's body suddenly went still. His skin, still tinged with green, began to emit a low hum. Beside him, Rhea's bioluminescence intensified, pulsing in a complex pattern. Dr. Tilek's tricorder beeped insistently. "Their vital signs are stabilizing," she announced, her voice filled with wonder. "But these readings, they're unlike anything I've ever seen." Henry's eyes snapped open, and he sat up with a gasp. His gaze darted around the room, taking in details with uncanny precision. "I can hear everything," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The molecules in the air, the heartbeats of everyone in this room." Rhea stirred beside him, her skin glowing softly. She held up her hand, watching as patterns of light danced across her palm. "We can communicate," she said softly, "through light and sound." Dr. Crusher stepped forward, her medical tricorder whirring. "The antidote hasn't just neutralized the pheromone effects," she said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "It's unlocked latent genetic potential in both human and Ferengi DNA." Before they could fully process this information, the facility shuddered under a heavy impact. Admiral Holden's voice came through again, urgent and strained. "The Klingons have opened fire," he reported. "They're demanding we surrender control of key Ferengi trading routes or face immediate invasion." Henry and Rhea exchanged a look, their newfound abilities allowing them to communicate without words. They had a solution, a risky, potentially world-changing solution. "We need to disperse the modified antidote through Ferenginar's atmospheric control systems," Henry said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Rhea nodded, her skin pulsing with light. "It's the only way to neutralize the pheromone cloud quickly enough," she added. Dr. Telek's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "But that would affect the entire population," she protested. "We have no idea what the long-term effects might be." Another impact rocked the facility, sending equipment crashing to the floor. Through the windows, they could see the sky lighting up with weapons fire as Klingon ships engaged Ferengi defense systems. Admiral Holden's face appeared on a nearby screen, his expression grave. "We're out of options," he said. "Whatever you're going to do it now." As the team scrambled to prepare for atmospheric dispersal, a new voice cut through the chaos. "I might be able to help with that." They turned to see Senator Victoria Hawthorne striding towards them, her usual poise restored despite the madness around them. "I'm not just a senator," she said, her eyes locking with Henry's. "I'm an operative for Section 31. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Section 31, the clandestine organization within Starfleet, operating outside the normal chain of command. "We have technology that can boost your facility's defenses," Hawthorne continued, her voice cool and measured. "Enough to ensure the successful dispersal of the antidote." Dr. Crusher stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "And what's the catch?" she demanded. Hawthorne's lips curved into a slight smile. "Exclusive rights to study and potentially weaponize this new hybrid biotechnology," she said simply. Another impact shook the facility, more violent than before. Alarms blared as the shields began to fail under the Klingon assault. Henry and Rhea stood at the center of the maelstrom, their bodies and minds irrevocably altered. The weight of two civilizations rested on their shoulders, the fate of Ferenginar and the balance of power in the Alpha Quadrant hanging in the balance. As they prepared to make a decision that would change the course of interstellar history, Henry felt a surge of purpose flow through his bond with Rhea. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The facility trembled under another barrage of Klingon fire, and Henry knew their time had run out. With a shared nod, he and Rhea turned to face the gathered scientists, politicians, and covert operatives. "Let's do this," Henry said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "It's time to rewrite the future. Future of the galaxy." The words had barely left Henry's mouth when another violent tremor shook the facility. Alarms blared as the Klingon bombardment intensified, threatening to breach their defenses at any moment. Henry and Rhea exchanged a silent glance, their newfound connection allowing them to communicate without words. They knew what had to be done. "We need to disperse the antidote now," Rhea said, her skin pulsing with an urgent pattern of light. Admiral Holden's face appeared on a nearby screen, his expression grim. "The Klingons are preparing for a final assault? It's now or never." Dr. Telek and Dr. Crusher sprang into action, their hands flying over consoles as they made final adjustments to the antidote formula. "We've modified it to work with Ferenginar's atmospheric conditions," Dr. Crusher reported, her voice tight with concentration. Senator Hawthorne stepped forward, her Section 31 credentials granting her access to previously locked systems. "I'm activating emergency protocols," she announced, tapping rapidly on a hidden panel. "This should buy us some time." A shimmering energy field enveloped the facility, temporarily shielding them from the Klingon attack. But the respite was brief. The new defenses wouldn't hold for long against the sustained barrage. "We need to reach the atmospheric control center," Henry said, his enhanced hearing picking up the sound of straining metal and failing circuits throughout the building. Rhea nodded, her bioluminescent skin casting an eerie glow in the dimly lit room. "I can interface with the Ferengi systems, bypass the security protocols." They moved swiftly through the damaged facility, Henry's echolocation guiding them, past debris and collapsed sections. Rhea's light pulsed in complex patterns, communicating with the Ferengi computer systems they passed. As they reached the atmospheric control center, another blast rocked the building. Warning lights flashed on every console. "Shields at 12%, Admiral Holden's voice crackled over the comm. "We can't take much more of this." Henry placed his hands on the main control panel, his heightened senses allowing him to process the vast array of data streaming across the screens. Rhea stood beside him, her skin glowing intensely as she interfaced directly with the system. "Initiating dispersal sequence," Henry announced, his fingers flying over the controls. A deep hum filled the air as massive turbines spun to life. On the monitors, they watched as a fine mist began to spread across Ferenginar's atmosphere. "It's working," Dr. Tilek's voice came through there, comms filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "The antidote is spreading rapidly through the lower atmosphere." Outside the facility, the frenzied cries of the mob began to subside. Reports flooded in from across the planet. The pheromone-induced madness was receding, replaced by confusion and disorientation. But as normalcy returned to the Ferengi population, new phenomena began to manifest. Isolated reports of enhanced sensory perception and bioluminescent skin eruptions started to trickle in. On the main view screen, Grand Nagus Zek's face appeared, his features twisted in a mixture of triumph and bewilderment. "My fellow Ferengi," he began, his voice booming across the planet, "we have entered a new era of evolution." As Zek continued his impromptu address, Admiral Holden's voice cut through on a private channel. "The Klingon ships have ceased fire," he reported, a note of cautious optimism in his tone. "They seem to be assessing the situation." Henry and Rhea shared a look of relief, but they knew this was just the beginning. The antidote had done its job, but at what cost? The Ferengi people were changing in ways they couldn't have predicted, and the repercussions would be felt across the quadrant. "We need to open diplomatic channels," Henry said, his mind already racing with the potential consequences of their actions. Rhea nodded, her skin pulsing in agreement. "The Klingons will want answers, and so will the rest of the Alpha Quadrant." As they prepared to face the aftermath of their bold strategy, Henry felt a surge of energy through his bond with Rhea. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as the first of a new hybrid species, bridging the gap between humans and Ferengi. The facility's comm system crackled to life, and Captain Taral's gruff voice filled the room. "Ferenginar," the Klingon commander growled, "we demand an explanation for these developments." Henry took a deep breath, steeling himself for the complex negotiations that lay ahead. The future of 3 civilizations hung in the balance, and the next few hours would shape the course of galactic history. The weight of their decision pressed heavily on Henry and Rhea as they prepared to face the consequences of their actions. As the facility's comm system crackled to life with Captain Toral's demand for answers, Henry and Rhea exchanged a determined look. They knew that the next few hours would be crucial in shaping the future of not just Ferenginar, but potentially the entire Alpha Quadrant. Admiral Holden stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed the Klingon commander. "Captain Toral, we propose an immediate trilateral meeting to discuss recent events. Your presence is requested on Ferenginar to participate in diplomatic talks." There was a tense pause before the Klingon's gruff voice responded. "Agreed. We will arrive within the hour. Be prepared to offer a full explanation." As preparations for the diplomatic talks began, the facility buzzed with activity. Security personnel scrambled to secure meeting areas, while scientists hurriedly compiled data on the recent genetic developments. Henry and Rhea found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of attention. Dr. Crusher approached them, her medical tricorder whirring as she conducted another series of scans. "Your physiology continues to evolve," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We need to run more comprehensive tests before the talks begin." As they made their way to the medical bay, Grand Nagus Zek's voice boomed over the facility's communication system, his excitement palpable even through the speakers. "My fellow Ferengi," he proclaimed, "today marks the dawn of a new era for our people. We stand on the brink of evolutionary greatness." Henry couldn't help but notice the mixed reactions among the Ferengi staff they passed. Some looked excited, their lobes twitching with anticipation, while others appeared apprehensive, casting wary glances at Henry and Rhea. In the medical bay, Dr. Telek joined Dr. Crusher in examining the hybrid pair. As they worked, Senator Victoria Hawthorne entered the room, her eyes sharp and calculating. "We need to discuss how we're going to approach these negotiations," Hawthorne said, her voice low and urgent. "The biotechnology you two represent could shift the balance of power in the quadrant." Before anyone could respond, Admiral Holden's voice came through the comm system. "The Klingon delegation has arrived. All key personnel report to the main conference room immediately." As they made their way to the meeting, Henry felt a surge of nervous energy coursing through him. He glanced at Rhea, whose skin pulsed with a pattern he now recognized as anxiety. The conference room was tense as they entered. Captain Toral stood with his arms crossed, flanked by two imposing Klingon warriors. Grand Nagus Zek sat at the head of the table, his eyes gleaming with barely suppressed excitement. Admiral Holden cleared his throat, beginning the proceedings. "We're here to discuss the recent events on Ferenginar and their potential impact on interstellar relations." Captain Toral's eyes narrowed as he glared at Henry and Rhea. "You will explain the nature of this genetic manipulation," he growled. As Henry opened his mouth to speak, Dr. Crusher stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Before we proceed, I have a significant discovery to share." All eyes turned to the doctor as she activated a holographic display. "My analysis of Henry and Rhea's DNA has revealed something extraordinary. Their hybrid genetics appear to have the capability to adapt and incorporate beneficial traits from other species they come into close contact with." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Grand Nagus Zek leapt to his feet, his eyes wide with the possibilities. "Imagine the potential for profit," he exclaimed. Captain Toral's hand instinctively went to his disruptor. "This is an abomination," he snarled, "a threat to the purity of all our species." Admiral Holden raised his hands, calling for calm. "This is precisely why we need to approach this situation with caution and cooperation," he said firmly. As the initial shock subsided, Grand Nagus Zek, ever the opportunist, leaned forward with a glint in his eye. "I propose we establish a joint research facility right here on Ferenginar," he said, his voice dripping with enthusiasm. "We could study and develop applications for this new hybrid biology, with all parties having equal access." Admiral Holden nodded slowly, considering the proposal. "It could lead to unprecedented advancements in medical science and interspecies cooperation," he mused, "but we would need strict ethical guidelines in place." Captain Toral's face contorted with conflicting emotions. The warrior in him recoiled at the idea, but the strategic part of his mind saw potential. "And what benefits would the Klingon Empire see from such an arrangement?" he demanded. As the negotiations intensified, Henry and Rhea found themselves under intense scrutiny. Each faction seemed to view them as the key to unlocking new realms of genetic potential. Amidst the heated discussions, Senator Hawthorne discreetly approached the hybrid pair. "We need to secure samples of your DNA," she whispered urgently, "for further study." Before Henry could respond, Dr. Telek appeared at their side, her Vulcan calm a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere of the room. "I believe that would be premature, Senator," she said evenly. "We must first establish proper protocols for any genetic sampling." As the diplomatic talks continued to unfold, reports began flooding in from across Ferenginar. The planet's population was experiencing unexpected changes, with individuals developing enhanced senses and even limited telepathic abilities. Grand Nagus Zek struggled to maintain his composure as he received updates on the rapidly evolving situation. The potential for profit was immense, but so too was the risk of societal upheaval. Captain Toral, sensing the growing instability, seized the moment. The Klingon Empire demands exclusive rights to study and replicate this hybrid physiology, he declared, his voice booming through the conference room. Refuse, and we will take what we need by force. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Henry and Rhea. The fate of 3 civilizations hung in the balance, and the next few moments would determine whether they were on the brink of a new era of cooperation or the precipice of interstellar conflict. Conflict or interstellar war. The tension in the room was palpable, electric currents of anxiety and anticipation coursing through the assembled delegates. Just as Captain Toral opened his mouth to reiterate his demands, a sudden commotion outside the conference room drew everyone's attention. Dr. Talek burst through the doors, her usually composed Vulcan demeanor replaced by awe-inspiring excitement. "We have a significant development," she announced, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Henry and Rhea. "The planet's atmospheric composition has begun interacting with the native flora in unexpected ways." The room erupted into a flurry of questions and exclamations. Grand Nagus Zek leapt from his seat, his eyes wide with a mixture of alarm and opportunism. "What does this mean for Ferenginar? For profit?" Dr. Talek activated a holographic display, showing rapidly changing plant structures. The dispersed antidote has triggered mutations in various plant species. Some are developing properties that mirror the enhanced abilities we've observed in the Ferengi population. Henry felt a surge of curiosity, his heightened senses allowing him to perceive minute details in the holographic imagery. Beside him, Rhea's skin pulsed with a pattern he now recognized as intense interest. Admiral Holden stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Dr. Talek, what are the implications of these mutations?" The Vulcan scientist's eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery. "I believe these mutated plants could serve as a natural, sustainable source of the hybrid biotechnology. The potential applications are fascinating." As the implications of this revelation sank in, Dr. Beverly Crusher approached Henry and Rhea, her medical tricorder whirring. Her face paled as she studied the readings. "We have another complication," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Rhea's pregnancy is progressing at an accelerated rate. It appears to be a side effect of your hybrid physiology." Henry felt a jolt of concern, instinctively moving closer to Rhea. Her skin flickered with a pattern he interpreted as a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Admiral Holden, overhearing the doctor's words, quickly assessed the situation. "This changes things," he said, addressing the room. "We need to prioritize the safety of Henry, Rhea, and their child. I propose a modified experiment." Captain Toral growled, his hand clenching into a fist. "We've had enough delays. The Empire demands action." Holden held up a hand, his voice steady and authoritative. "Instead of direct physical contact, we use the mutated Ferengi plants as intermediaries. This approach minimizes risks while still providing valuable data." Grand Nagus Zek, seeing an opportunity, jumped in. "I have the perfect solution. We'll conduct the experiment in a new state-of-the-art research facility right here on Ferenginar. Top-notch security, cutting-edge equipment, all under Ferengi oversight, of course." The suggestion was met with skepticism from both the human and Klingon delegations. Captain Toral's patience had clearly reached its limit. "Enough!" he roared, banging his hand on the table. "The experiment will proceed immediately, with full Klingon access to all data and samples. My warbirds are moving into position as we speak. Choose wisely." The room fell into a tense silence, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. Suddenly, a new voice crackled over the facility's communication system. "This is Captain T'Pol of the Vulcan science vessel T'Plana Hath. We have entered Ferengi space and request permission to join these proceedings." Admiral Holden's eyes lit up with hope. "Permission granted, Captain T'Pol. Your timing is impeccable." As the Vulcan delegation beamed down, Henry and Rhea exchanged a look of cautious optimism. The arrival of a neutral party might just be the stabilizing factor they needed. Captain T'Pol, a striking Vulcan woman with decades of xenobiological experience, quickly grasped the situation. "We offer our expertise and resources to mediate this experiment and ensure impartial analysis of the results." With the addition of Vulcan oversight, the four species cautiously agreed to proceed. The newly constructed Ferengi research facility buzzed with activity as scientists from all factions worked to set up the necessary equipment. Henry and Rhea found themselves at the center of a specially designed chamber, surrounded by an array of sensors and the mutated Ferengi plants. As final preparations were made, Henry felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness coursing through him. Rhea's skin pulsed with a similar sentiment, their shared emotions amplifying through their unique bond. Dr. Tilek approached the chamber, her eyes alight with scientific curiosity. "We're about to begin. The chamber will be flooded with a carefully calibrated mixture of pheromones and organic compounds. Are you ready?" Henry took a deep breath, glancing at Rhea. Her bioluminescent skin glowed with willpower. He nodded. "We're ready." As the experiment commenced, the chamber filled with a swirling mist of organic particles. Henry felt his skin tingle, his enhanced senses heightening even further. Beside him, Rhea's luminescence intensified, pulsing in sync with the surrounding plant life. The sensors around them lit up, recording unprecedented levels of bioelectric activity. It was as if a silent conversation was taking place between the hybrid couple and the mutated flora. Suddenly, Rhea gasped, her hands moving to her swollen abdomen. "Henry," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and a hint of fear. "The baby." Before Henry could respond, a surge of energy pulsed through the chamber. The unborn child, already showing signs of advanced development, had become an active participant in the experiment. Its unique bioelectric signature caused a cascading reaction, temporarily overloading the facility's power systems. As alarms blared and scientists scrambled to contain the unexpected surge, reports flooded in from across Ferenginar. Similar energy spikes were occurring in areas with high concentrations of the mutated plants. Dr. Tilek's voice came through the chamber's speakers, filled with scarcely controlled excitement. "Fascinating. It appears the hybrid biology has begun to influence the planet's ecosystem on a massive scale. We're detecting a complex network of bioelectric communication spanning the entire planet." As the implications of this development began to sink in, Henry and Rhea shared a look of awe and trepidation. Their child, still unborn, had already changed the course of history for multiple civilizations. Outside the chamber, the representatives of four galactic powers watched in stunned silence as Ferenginar itself seemed to pulse with new life. The experiment, intended to be a controlled demonstration, had instead triggered a cascade of changes that threatened to reshape the balance of power in the Alpha Quadrant. Admiral Holden's voice cut through the chaos, steady and resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a crossroads. The decisions we make in the coming hours will shape the future of not just our species, but of entire worlds." As the gravity of the situation settled over the assembled delegates, the Ferengi research facility hummed with newfound energy. The hybrid biology, now intricately linked with Ferenginar's evolving ecosystem, presented both unprecedented opportunities and potential dangers. The next steps taken by the four species would determine the course of biological and technological advancement for generations to come. As the gravity of the situation settled over the assembled delegates, a sudden surge of bioelectric energy pulsed through the facility. The hybrid biology, now intricately linked with Ferenginar's evolving ecosystem, sparked an unexpected chain reaction. Henry and Rhea emerged from the experimental chamber, their bodies radiant with bioluminescent energy. Dr. Tilek and Dr. Crusher quickly ushered them towards a secure medical bay, their tricorders whirring frantically as they attempted to process the rapidly changing data. "Fascinating," Dr. Tilek murmured, her Vulcan composure barely concealing her excitement. "The hybrid biology appears to be accelerating all biological processes within its vicinity." Dr. Crusher's eyes widened as she focused her scans on Rhea. "The fetus. It's developing at an unprecedented rate. We need to get her to the medical bay immediately." As they rushed through the corridors, the facility's flora began to respond to the energy emanating from the hybrid couple. Potted plants lining the hallways burst into bloom, their growth visible to the naked eye. Once inside the medical bay, Rhea's condition progressed rapidly. Her abdomen swelled visibly, causing her to gasp in a mixture of awe and discomfort. Henry clasped her hand tightly, feeling a surge of bioelectric energy course through their connected bodies. "Henry," Rhea whispered, her voice tinged with urgency. I think it's time." Dr. Crusher nodded, her expression a mix of professional focus and wonder. "You're right, Rhea. You're going into labor." As contractions began to rack Rhea's body, the energy pulses intensified. The medical equipment flickered and sparked, struggling to cope with the unusual readings. Outside the medical bay, Admiral Holden, Grand Nagus Zek, Captain Torel, and T'Pol gathered, their previous conflicts momentarily forgotten in the face of this unprecedented event. "What's happening in there?" Captain Torel demanded, his warrior's instincts on high alert. Admiral Holden raised a hand to silence him. "We wait. This is beyond any of our experiences." Inside the medical bay, Rhea's labor progressed with astonishing speed. Henry stood by her side, offering words of encouragement as Dr. Crusher and her team worked tirelessly. The air crackled with energy, each of Rhea's contractions sending a visible wave of bioluminescence through the room. Suddenly, Rhea let out a primal cry, her body arching off the biobed. A blinding flash of light filled the room, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the sound of two distinct cries filled the air. Dr. Crusher, her face beaming with amazement, held up two small, squirming forms. "Twins," she announced, her voice filled with awe. "A boy and a girl." Henry felt his heart swell with an overwhelming surge of love as he gazed upon his children. Their skins shimmered with a soft golden glow, a perfect blend of human and Ferengi features. Their eyes, large and expressive, seemed to take in the world with impossible wisdom. As Henry cradled the newborns, bringing them close to Rhea, he felt a jolt of sensation. The instant his fingers made contact with their tiny hands, his mind was flooded with a kaleidoscope of images and feelings. Glimpses of potential futures, the vast interconnectedness of life across the galaxy. Outside the medical bay, the effects of the birth rippled outward. The facility's communication systems crackled to life, inundated with reports from across Ferenginar. The planet's ecosystem was undergoing a rapid, extraordinary transformation. Grand Nagus Zek's eyes widened as he listened to the incoming data. Barren wastelands. They're blooming. Entire continents are erupting with new life. T'Pol raised an eyebrow, her Vulcan calm barely concealing her fascination. It appears the hybrid biology has triggered a planet-wide adaptive response. Fascinating. As the implications of these changes began to sink in, Admiral Holden turned to his fellow leaders. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, nodding to T'Pol, "I believe we're witnessing the dawn of a new era, one that requires cooperation, not conflict." Captain Torel, his earlier aggression tempered by the magnitude of the moment, nodded slowly. "The Empire, we must be part of this. The potential is too great to ignore." Grand Nagus Zek, his mind already racing with the possibilities, grinned widely. "A joint venture. Think of the profits. The scientific advancements we could achieve together." T'Pol stepped forward, her voice calm but authoritative. "I propose the formation of a galactic cooperative for hybrid research and development, a collaborative effort to study and responsibly implement this new biology for the benefit of all our species." As the leaders began to discuss the logistics of this unprecedented alliance, Henry and Rhea sat together in the medical bay, marveling at their newborn twins. The infants, already displaying signs of accelerated development, cooed softly in their arms. Dr. Crusher approached, her face a mix of excitement and concern. "Henry, Rhea," she said softly, "your children. They're unlike anything we've ever seen. Their rate of development, their apparent cognitive abilities, they're off the charts." Henry nodded, feeling a deep sense of both pride and responsibility. What does this mean for them? For us? Before Dr. Crusher could respond, Admiral Holden entered the room, followed by the other leaders. His eyes softened as he took in the scene before him. "It means," Holden said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and persistence, "that you've just become the most important family in the Alpha Quadrant. We need your help, all of you, to navigate this new frontier." As Henry and Rhea exchanged glances, their twins reached out, tiny hands grasping at the air. In that moment, surrounded by leaders of 4 galactic powers and cradling the embodiment of a new evolutionary leap, they realized that their adventure was nowhere near the end. In fact, it was just beginning.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.